Thank you for joining our webinar on the role of humidity in reducing airborne virus transmission. My name is Abby Rogers and I will be facilitating this webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them using the questions tab in the control bar, and we will respond to them at the end of the presentation. I will now hand this over to Duncan, our DriSteem Global Business Development Leader.
Thank you, Abby, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this presentation. My name is Duncan and I'm the Global Business Development Leader here at DriSteem. Today, we're going to take a look at the role of humidity in the airborne transmission of viruses, and of course, with particular reference to the current COVID-19 pandemic. If we think about today's situation with COVID, it's creating a heightened sense of awareness of the impact of airborne viruses, and in particular, as building professionals, a real need for us to consider how we address this from the point of view of the built environment. The severity and global impact of COVID-19 has seemed to catch the medical profession by surprise. However, within the field of humidification and HVAC engineering, there's been an ongoing debate as to the many benefits of healthy levels of indoor humidification, particularly with respect to reduced HAIs or hospital-acquired infections. This discussion has been increasingly supported by scientific research. Today, in light of this research, we will review the role of humidification to help reduce the transmission, infectivity, and severity of COVID-19, and briefly discuss some strategies for implementing this non-pharmaceutical intervention. Our goal will be to improve the understanding of the relationship between humidity and health and wellness, and touch on the current standards and how to have a short and mid-term response to the virus. I don't think I need to remind you that the healthcare market is a significant one. It's currently valued at about £7 trillion. In the UK, for example, the National Health Service's capital budget is about £7.1 billion, of which the HVAC portion of this is estimated to be over £390 million. We've also seen the virus impacting the long-term care and nursing home markets. These are also facilities where we can expect increasing demands for building solutions to combat the virus. In the UK, we have around 5,100 nursing homes, with about 86% of these in private ownership. Total spend in the UK on nursing homes is around £97 billion, and whilst data on HVAC spend is not readily available, it can be expected that building standards compliance will be closely monitored as a result of the pandemic. Why is it so critical for us to look at the role of humidification in the built environment? Healthy levels of humidification can help us to reduce the spread of the virus, and in particular, to protect staff, patients, and residents, many of whom are our most vulnerable populations. In addition, there is a real impact in terms of cost. Although we're focusing on COVID-19 and the spread of airborne viruses, it should be mentioned that humidification has a role to play in reducing hospital-acquired infections. These infections are the cause of significant economic costs to the hospital system. In the US, they impact, there's a requirement to meet the Joint Commission's healthcare standards, and in the UK, the impact is on the ranking system efficiency metrics. So why be concerned about humidity levels in the clinical setting? There are really three key elements with respect to the current pandemic. Firstly, the persistence and dispersion. Low ambient humidity reduces droplet size, which allows for a prolonged airborne period, which in turn allows for further travel. The low weight due to loss of water prevents the virus from being knocked down and then cleaned up with usual or traditional surface cleaning hygiene methods. Extended airborne time may be as much as 36 to 72 hours and allows for significant travel distance. In addition, low humidity and low droplet weight may allow viruses to become airborne after settling. We should note that this is also true for other hospital-acquired infections. Secondly, infectivity. Low ambient humidity with associated reduced droplet size allows for deeper penetration into the lungs, where there is a less effective biological response. This is aggravated by the low humidity conditions, reducing the body's own immune response for example, inactivated or reduced functioning of cilia, thickened mucosa, and so on. And lastly, viral activity. Low ambient humidity levels act on the aerosol salt content, which allows for prolonged viral activity. Higher RH renders viruses inactive. In addition, higher humidity levels influence the patient's own cellular recovery. We'll take a look at all of these factors as we review the current clinical research. Numerous studies have tracked the behavior of airborne viruses, and the now urgent interest is generating almost daily papers and articles. It is critical for us to understand, in light of the current research, how airborne viruses behave. Airborne viruses are expelled as aerosols through breathing, speaking, coughing, and sneezing. They're also expelled during surgical procedures such as intubation. We've seen examples recently of infections among socially distancing choirs on the west coast of the United States. It's believed that COVID-19, or SARS-CoV-2, behaves as an aerosol in similar ways to SARS-1 or SARS-CoV-1, MERS, and Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, and H1N1 influenza, which have all been widely researched over the past 18 years. How long an aerosol remains airborne and how far it travels affects not only the spread of infection, but the severity of infection, because respiratory viruses are most harmful when deeply inhaled into the lungs. Aerosols that desiccate into virus nuclei due to low ambient humidity may be traveling distances and infect patients beyond the current 6 foot or 2 meter social distancing recommendations, and are demonstrated to be more ineffective in low humidity environments. Moving to the, more effective in low humidity environments. Moving to the next slide, we can clearly see the potential for significant aerosol travel. We've curated a number of studies which you'll be able to review at your own leisure. This presentation will be available to you, and these studies are hyperlinked here as well as individually with comments at the back of the presentation. We'll take a look at a few of these studies mentioned and touch on a few of the more important points. The first study that we want to touch on is the famous Sterling and Arundel study from 1986. They concluded that the optimum range for health, wellness, and comfort being about 40 to 60% RH. This chart is probably very familiar to most of you, as it is frequently referenced by ASHRAE and other organizations. You can see the blue band. This is the optimal range for reductions in the impact and infectivity and survival of viruses. It's important to note that there is also true for bacteria, or some bacteria, and survival of viruses can in fact occur obviously above the 60% range. So we do have to be mindful of that band of 40 to 60%. It also has an impact on allergens, dust mites, etc. So we see the positive impact of humidity in terms of human well-being, not only in terms of the impact of viral infections. In 2012, a study by Yang and Ma from Virginia Tech, they postulated a relationship between virus, solute, and water, and suggest viral viability in aerosols may be impacted by mid-range RH. We've added some videos and multimedia resources at the end of this presentation, and I highly recommend viewing Lindsay Ma's YouTube-hosted presentation. Also in 2012, Notai worked with the CDC and NIOSH to research the airborne spread of influenza. It concluded that improper mask fitting, such as for the N95, provides limited protection to small particle nuclei, as we'll see later. Maintaining optimal humidity levels will help to reduce small droplet nuclei formation and the resulting infections, and improve then the operation and efficacy of the N95 mask. Stephen Welty presented a paper to ASHRAE based on his earlier research of the EPA, for the EPA and CDC in 2009 following the H1N1 flu pandemic. Yes, it was classified as a pandemic back then by the CDC. And his paper references the airborne spread influenced by RH levels. In 2018, in a real-world study, Jessica Ryman with the Mayo Clinic and ourselves, DriSteem Corp here in Minnesota, conducted a side-by-side test of the impact of raised humidity levels to combat the flu in a classroom setting. Results clearly demonstrated that humidification can act as a non-pharmaceutical intervention for the flu. In 2020, Nancy Goff from Johns Hopkins provided a layman's explanation for the 2019 study by Iwasaki, low ambient humidity impacts barrier function and innate resistance against influenza infection. This is a very interesting study coming out of Yale. In this study, the researchers used genetically engineered mice with human-like lung tissue and were able to explore the impact of low humidity on both the infectivity as well as the recovery time for lung tissue. 40 to 60% humidity was clearly demonstrated to reduce infectivity while supporting immune response and cellular recovery. Arundel has been able to demonstrate pathogen-bearing droplets and aerosols can travel in excess of 25 feet or further, as shown in the capture of a sneeze, and the related aerosol cloud. This is significant as the aerosol cloud will immediately be acted upon by the ambient conditions, and more specifically temperature and relative humidity. A lower ambient RH will reduce aerosol particle size and weight to create virus nuclei. We've also added a link to some video from the Japanese news broadcast NHK, demonstrates a significant travel of both droplets and nuclei from simply speaking. Droplets are by definition larger than 20 microns, and whilst the small droplets and aerosols can be from 10 to 20 microns, we're generally concerned about those that are below 10 microns. We have droplet nuclei that can be as small as 0.5 microns. In a low ambient RH environment, the small droplets and aerosols may immediately shed moisture and reduce size and weight to become a droplet nuclei. The droplet size impacts its float time, ability to travel, and its depth of penetration into the respiratory system. In this slide, we see an illustration of aerosol size versus float time and distance traveled. As low RH desiccates the aerosol, it may remain airborne for an extended period of time. Some studies have shown as much as 72 hours. From the perspective of a built environment, we have to consider the capacity of our filtration system to capture small particle size. We should recall with SARS that it was possible for aerosol viral particles to float not only along corridors, but also out of buildings and be pulled into the ventilation systems of adjacent buildings. Very recently, researchers at the University of Helsinki in Finland have modeled the behavior of the COVID virus. In this particular example, they modeled the behavior of the virus in a supermarket setting. You can see that the simulated carrier on the bottom right-hand side has generated a particle cloud that is drifting not only through the aisle of the supermarket, but actually moving across the top of the shelving and infecting somebody on the next aisle. They found that smaller particles, so 5 micrometers or microns or less, were able to travel significant distances. Many of you may have seen this on the news recently. When we think particle size, we've mentioned that humidity acts on the aerosol. So as the aerosol is exposed, in the space of about 1/2 to 1.5 seconds, we can see that aerosol particle size can desiccate and dry. As it dries, it will shrink in size. In a higher ambient relative humidity environment, we will be able to see heavier virus particles settle quickly. That's demonstrated by the blue particles in this screenshot. Droplet size impacts on infectivity, longevity, and depth of penetration. We've looked at how humidity impacts the viral aerosol in terms of its float time and potential travel, but another aspect which is quite critical is its impact on the infectivity of the virus. This is a respiratory virus, and the virus in the form of droplet nuclei has the potential to penetrate deep into the respiratory tract, and in particular into the lower respiratory tract. This diagram influences or illustrates the potential depth of penetration based on aerosol or droplet nuclei size, influenced by ambient RH. This is significant as it can bypass the body's defense systems. This increases the chance of infection and the severity of the infection. You'll see in this graphic that we can typically capture large particles between 10 to 30 microns in our nasal mucosa. We still see a capacity to fight the virus in the 10 to 20 micron size in the upper respiratory tract. The body's mucosal layer combining with cilia can clear these particles. It's important to note that low RH has been demonstrated to reduce the effectiveness of both mucosal production and cilia action. In fact, smoking and vaping tends to neutralize the body's own natural defenses, which has given rise to greater mortality. The smaller droplet nuclei can move deeper into the lung and effectively into the alveoli, where we start to see a lack of capacity or capability for our body's immune system. That's particularly important since we also know that we have no natural antibodies or immunity. This is a novel or new coronavirus. As you know, it's zoonotic. It's transferred from animals to humans. As such, we need to depend on other mechanisms within the body to allow us to address or attack that virus. Recall Iwasaki's experiments conducted at Yale that found that the body's immune system is best equipped to combat respiratory infections at 40 to 60% RH. In addition to improving the body's immune response, higher humidity levels have been demonstrated to improve cell recovery and regeneration. Note I also demonstrated that a 40 to 60% RH reduces infectivity. If you look to the fourth chart D, you can see that a less than 1 micron fraction is most infective from 10 to 30% RH and least infective at 43% RH. Both Iwasaki and Marr have demonstrated that an optimal humidity level inactivates the viral nuclei. Maintaining an optimal humidity level reduces the virus's viability in the environment. This can be both airborne as well as on a surface. And a number of studies have shown that between 40 to 60% RH provides the greatest level of inactivation of the virus, meaning that the virus is no longer a concern to us. I mentioned that in addition to viral respiratory infections, healthy humidity levels can also play a role in other hospital and clinical care settings where we see nosocomial or hospital-acquired infections. These could be bacterial pneumonia, C. diff, MRSA, and others. In all of these cases, the presence of HAIs in a hospital or nursing home generates a tremendous cost burden. When we think about the cost of implementing and operating humidification equipment, we really should be cognizant that it has a tremendous ROI or payback in the sense that we're going to be able to avoid a lot of unnecessary costs associated with HAIs, and we can expect better patient outcomes. The English National Point Prevalence Survey identified that 6.4% of inpatients in acute care hospitals in 2011 had a healthcare associated infection. 6 most common types of healthcare associated infections accounted for more than 8% of all healthcare associated infections, where pneumonia and other respiratory infections was by far the most predominant. Reducing the number and prevalence of HAIs will have a very positive impact in terms of hospital cost and patient outcome. We should note that the Department of Health guidance notes on infection control in the built environment also fails to recognize the need to maintain optimal humidity levels. There's a greater emphasis on things like cupboards and patient storage, and yet from the NHS's own standpoint, reducing HAIs is considered to be a significant importance. I hope we've sufficiently discussed the science behind airborne viral transmission and the impact of indoor air hydration, another way to look at humidity levels. Let's talk a little bit about humidity level guidelines. Currently, ASHRAE's guidelines for hospitals and allied facilities vary from 20 to 60% RH dependent on the usage of the space. We should note that prior guidelines had a minimum 30% RH but were reduced in 2008, Addendum D. From an ASHRAE perspective, some of the areas that see higher levels of RH, such as the intensive care unit of 36% guideline or burns units 46%, do go beyond that 20% minimum. As a volunteer firefighter, I'm quite interested on the impacts of humidity on burns. It really is very simple. If we're looking at drying out skin cells, we're looking at those cells dying. So optimal conditions or highest humidity levels being utilized in the burns units, along with elevated temperatures to maintain patient core temperature. Globally, it should be noted that Japan has for some time recognized the importance of higher RH levels, despite the fact that they are an energy poor country, and they're willing to hold patient safety and well-being ahead of energy savings. ASHRAE has recently created the Epidemic Task Force and have made resources available on the hyperlink provided. This has included a special statement that the transmission of SARS-CoV-2, which is the cause of COVID-19, the actual disease, through the air is sufficiently likely, that airborne exposure to the virus should be controlled, and that changes to building operations, including the operation of heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems, can reduce airborne exposures. So optimizing humidification levels will be one of the means of combating the virus. We'll talk a little later about some steps that you can take, but you should be aware of last week's update to the position document on infectious aerosols. We'll look briefly at this position paper, which recognizes the role of the built environment in reducing the transmission and impact of the virus, and more importantly, has extended this into commercial buildings that currently lack minimum RH guidelines. ASHRAE notes in the revised update that the HVAC system can contribute to help control the spread of the virus by interrupting the transmission route. There's also a recognition of the role of RH in the biological response, citing some of the studies that we've already reviewed. From a healthcare perspective, maintaining temperature and humidity as applicable to the aerosol of concern, we would argue that 45% will be the optimum level. And of significance is the inclusion of commercial, or at least non-healthcare buildings into the guidelines, something to consider as we begin to repopulate buildings post-lockdown. I think to emphasize things, we can look to the recent statement from the White House, a clear recognition of the survival of the virus as an aerosol for more than 60 minutes at low RH conditions of 20% by the Department of Homeland Security. They have for many years focused their attention on the potential for bioterrorism, such as the post-9/11 anthrax infections, as well as pandemics such as Ebola, and they're a credible authority. CIBC have cited Lindsay Ma's work and indicated that airborne transmission may be a route of infection. Their comment, it is prudent to ensure ventilation is operating appropriately to protect occupants. And we would argue that ensuring healthy relative humidity should be a key part of this plan. CIBC themselves have just released their guidance for ventilation systems. Humidity levels to be maintained above 40% wherever possible. No upper limit is mentioned, but we would suggest a maximum of 60%. REVER acknowledges the growing evidence for airborne transmission, however, regrettably have failed to link the humidity levels in the built environment to particle nuclei spread or infectivity and viral activity. By contrast, Eurovent have indicated humidity levels greater than 30% are recommended. The suggestions made after the H1N1 pandemic to the CDC and then ASHRAE and Welty's CIAQ presentation are likely relevant to COVID, mainly a holistic approach to mitigation of the virus in a phased or stepped approach where increased humidity levels form the backbone of a strategy that includes increased air changes, effective UV, either induct or in room, improved bathroom exhaust, and finally, effective filtration. Keeping indoor humidity levels at 40 to 6% RH is a safe, easy, and efficient way to reduce the spread of the virus. Not only viruses that cause COVID-19, but also, of course, other respiratory illnesses and HAIs. It will not only reduce transmission, protecting both patients and staff's health, but as we've mentioned, may help to reduce the severity of the infection and the length of time that's therefore required for hospitalization. The addition of humidity to an indoor space can render viruses inactive and less infectious in as little as 15 minutes. Humidification systems can be quickly installed on a wall and adding moisture to rooms right away if they're using a blower or direct system. Larger humidification systems can often be incorporated into a facility's existing HVAC system, such as Induct or air handling system, or potentially rooftop mount. We would recommend that any strategy starts with a site survey. Most healthcare facilities were commissioned with humidification. This equipment may not be operating due to maintenance issues, may sadly have been turned off, or the humidification levels reduced. Taking RH readings using a hygrometer or checking the levels via the BMS in areas that may experience COVID cases or areas where asymptomatic cases may present will quickly determine if a facility is optimizing their defense of COVID virus. A target of 45% RH is generally recognized as providing positive benefits. If you're seeing lower RH levels, then test the equipment to see if it's operating correctly. Adjust or raise set points if required. And of course, work with local sales agents to explore options for additional capacity or output. If you're looking at getting there quickly, commercial grade humidification equipment provides the control you need to maintain that optimal humidity level. Simple access to power, water, and drain is all you need to get a system operational. Think of any place there is a sink nearby in the hospital environment. It's particularly the case also in nursing homes where they may not see centralized systems or centralized humidification. Local reps can help determine appropriate size and type of equipment in as little as a day. DriSteam's hygienic solutions can be rapidly implemented, and of course you can count on a system from DriSteam to provide superior performance, protecting your staff and patients and investment. I'd like to close with a quote from Justice Archie Campbell, who led a royal commission into Canada's SARS epidemic, and is referenced in an excellent article by Harriman and Brousseau. The point is not who is right and who is wrong about airborne transmission, nor is it how far large droplets travel. The point is not science, but safety. Scientific knowledge changes constantly. Yesterday's scientific dogma is today's discarded fable. When it comes to worker safety in hospitals, we should not be driven by the scientific dogma of yesterday or even by the scientific dogma of today. We should be driven by the precautionary principle that reasonable steps to reduce risk should not await scientific certainty. And I think here we can substitute engineer or building operator in place of scientist. Humidification is common sense science when it comes to protecting staff, patients, and residents. You can make this change immediately and easily. For more information, you can follow the hyperlink to resources available on our website, www.DriSteem.com, humidification for virus reduction. Of course, DriSteam sales team and agents will be hosting additional technically focused webinars, and most importantly, you have their expert knowledge available. So contacting your DriSteam rep through the Find a Rep page, you'll see at the end of the presentation, we placed a number of resources that are available for you. Please feel free to reach us at sales@DriSteam.com, your local agent, and certainly consider following us on LinkedIn. I'd like to thank everybody for their time, and I believe that we're ready for any questions that you may have, Abby. Could you check any questions from the audience?
Sure, Duncan. We currently have one question, and it's a little bit long. It's a part of a research paper, it looks like, and it says, can you please advise on this paper? And it claims that humidification and air conditioning have no practical effect on virus transmission. Maybe we can look at that afterward.
Yeah, I'd be happy to look at the paper itself and get back to the folks that are raising the question. I believe that the evidence is pretty overwhelming, and certainly for organizations that tend to be conservative, whether that's CIPC or ASHRAE, there is a clear indication and understanding now. And as I mentioned, even the White House briefing as an example, that there is a link. That research, I think, still there's a lot of work to be done. It's, for example, very curious that we're seeing a tremendous number of cases that are showing up in, for example, slaughterhouses or abattoirs. what we call meatpacking plants in the US. And that may not be a surprise. There is evidence to show that the virus tends to thrive at extremely high levels of humidity. And that will be, and obviously then heat. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that research. But I believe that the evidence that's been posed, and of course, I would say the review by many experts in the field, clearly indicates that humidity does play a role and has played a role in a variety of other viruses, as well as I've mentioned, bacterial and related issues.
Another question for you, Duncan. What is your opinion of SARS survivability with humidity rather than the transport system?
So the survivability evidence is growing. We have different survival levels showing on surfaces. There's also a demonstration of survivability in aerosol in air. And we certainly need to be cognizant that it's likely on most surfaces greater than 3 hours. Again, I can reference the particular papers for the questioner and provide some further details. It also requires further research. That survivability, the research that was conducted in a very static environment, didn't necessarily consider all factors. So I think, again, we probably will see more information coming out in the future. But again, I think, as we mentioned with the words from the Justice Archie Campbell, we really should err on the side of caution when we think about survivability. And it's certainly not unreasonable to expect that it's in hours, if not days.
Thank you, Duncan. Someone said that I am convinced about the value of RH above 40 or 45%. However, in London, RH at 60% and 25 degrees Celsius will cause condensation of external surfaces in winter, e.g. double glazing at temperatures below 3.5 degrees Celsius. How do you suggest avoiding this condensation and the mold it can lead to?
So a couple of points. We have seen there is at the back of the presentation an interesting article which perhaps I can pop to regarding reducing the impact of this was a study by Carides, and I've been corresponding with this gentleman. Effectively, he's been able to identify in New York, and of course we end up with some more extreme conditions in New York in terms of temperature. But has been able to identify that there is a significant window of opportunity to increase RH. I certainly agree that there are cases where it is difficult to maintain prolonged higher RH levels. 45% certainly would be the optimal level. I don't see any specific requirement to go above 45, given the science that's out there at this point. Like anything, I think something is better than nothing, that if there are those design days where we see colder temperatures that could cause a problem, we certainly want to be cognizant of that. And so we'll look at setbacks. We'll look obviously at potentially reducing that level with colder outside temperatures. At no point should we be looking at causing additional problems. I think the physician's adage is do no harm. And from a building engineering perspective, I will say, however, and being used to very cold climates, we had snow here on Monday morning, that we are able to still raise humidification, generally speaking, without any negative impacts to that 40 or 45%. But even getting to 35% would be an improvement and would certainly help in different aspects, both in terms of transmission routes as well as potentially improving patient outcomes.
For buildings which do not have humidity control, what would you recommend to clients wishing to retrofit short-term measures? What are the pros and cons of such? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
What are the pros and cons of central humidification in AHU versus Induct versus local units in room?
So it would really vary on building construction. capacity, again, type of application, and that's where we would highly recommend speaking to one of our agents to review. Generally speaking, it's preferable to add a system to or humidification system to an existing central system. However, there are many buildings where that's not possible, and we then have to look at the ability to put something in space. There are solutions that can be implemented in space where we don't have duct work. But again, it's a very broad question. We can say DriSteem has a very broad range of technologies, and those can be applied in quite a wide range of building construction types, and also with fuel types, whether it's electricity, steam-to-steam generation using an existing boiler with clean water, or gas, and so
on. That is all the questions for now, Duncan. Back to you.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for your time. Again, I encourage you to take a look at some of the slides that we've, as well as some of the video links that are provided at the back of the presentation. And please feel free to reach out to DriSteem or our agents for us to assist you in trying to incorporate these technologies. Have a wonderful afternoon.